Jesus was host at the Last Supper.
Why then did Jesus wash feet of his disciples?
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Welcome to the American Religious Town Hall. I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Jerry Lutz, and we have a distinguished group of panelists that we'd like to introduce themselves to you, and we'll begin on my right with John.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
My name is Tony Matthews, and I serve as senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas, which is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
5 weeks ago, the Catholics and Protestants around the world celebrated Easter. But today, the Eastern Orthodox Church celebrates its Easter. Why the different dates? Is it a theological issue? No. The reason for the two dates of Easter is that Eastern Church follows the Julian calendar as opposed to the Western Church, which follows the Gregorian calendar. Last year, on Orthodox Easter, we discussed the great Easter service in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem called the Miracle of the Holy Fire. This year, we're going to think about the Orthodox Maundy Thursday service when the church remembers Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. For this service, we'll go to the Syrian Orthodox monastery and the Church of St. Mark in the Old City of Jerusalem. On Maundy Thursday at 5 p.m., each disciple makes his entrance into the sanctuary when his gospel name is called, and he takes his seat in a horseshoe circle. When the Archbishop enters, taking the role of Jesus, he is wearing a simple white gown which symbolizes Jesus taking the form of a slave. Then the Archbishop starts washing the feet of each disciple. It's not a sprinkle of water like is done in most Western churches, but each foot is washed thoroughly with a bar of soap. After being washed and dried, the foot is then anointed with oil. Then the Archbishop does something quite unbelievable to those of us who belong to the Western Church. The Archbishop kisses the feet of each of the disciples. In this service, Jesus becomes the slave. Jesus becomes the servant. Jesus on Maundy Thursday calls his disciples to do likewise, to become a slave or servant. With this rich symbolism, Jesus challenges each one of his followers to do likewise. Today, I'd like to hear our panelists address 3 questions on this Orthodox Easter Sunday. 1, seen in the context of first century Roman Palestine, where foot washing was always done by the slave, not by the host, what is Jesus saying to us by his action during the Last Supper? 2, how important is it that on Maundy Thursday, Jesus becomes a slave, and how do we, the followers of Jesus, respond? And 3, in your particular denomination, what's the significance of Jesus' foot washing on Maundy Thursday? And this is a wonderful, interesting topic in the Christian church, and we're going to begin with our Lutheran, Carl.
Well, I hope that it's not very uniquely Lutheran what I'm going to say theologically, but growing up, Maundy Thursday was always a really special day for me because it really, there were 2 things that were happening simultaneously. I mean, first of all, it's Passover. Jesus is up in the upper room with his disciples, and they're breaking bread, having the Passover meal. And at the conclusion of the meal, Christ takes the bread and breaks it and gives it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body given for you." And then he does the same. This is the cup of the new covenant, and it's blood shed for you. Jesus, of course, is for Christians the Passover lamb, whose blood takes away the sin of the world, just as the Passover lamb was what protected the Jews as they were fleeing from the Egyptians. Except now, this blood, rather than being spread on the doorpost now, as Jesus gives it to us, now becomes a part of us, and we a part of Christ. And so it's Christ really bringing us into his life and his life into us. And that, in that way, I always understood it as the first piece is Christ being the host, meaning he is both, he's the victim here of what he's going to die, all right, and yet he is, he's also the host. I mean, he's brought this together, and he becomes the center and the person who's ultimately giving everything in this supper. And so he is that host. And I mean, the second piece of it, which I know we're going to get into quite a bit here, and that's the Maundy Thursday, because I always heard in my church it was more about the communion that was the most important thing. And the foot washing, you always heard it read, but no one ever enacted it in my churches growing up. But, you know, as a kid, you're going, Maundy? Is that Monday? What does Maundy mean anyway? And, of course, as you get older, you finally learn that Maundy comes from the Latin word mandatum, meaning command, and it's where Jesus says, you know, I give you a new command that you love one another. So the second piece of this supper is, the first is Christ giving himself for us and our forgiveness. The second piece is that now that I've served you in this way, I mean, now you serve one another. And so that love becomes the centerpiece. And of course, the foot washing becomes the act of that. And I'll just, John, you got this down, I know, on the sermon.
Well, if we were all together in Jerusalem on Orthodox Maundy Thursday, oh my land, we would be attending 5 different foot washing services. We would start off with the Greek Orthodox foot washing service in the Parvis of the Holy Sepulchre. That means the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre. And then we would next go to the Coptic and then to the Ethiopian churches. And following lunch, we would go to the Armenian church for a magnificent but totally different, very solemn service. And then at 5 o'clock, we would go over for the service at St. Mark's Orthodox Church. It's a great day of foot washing. And one thing not mentioned in the moderator's statement is the following of the washing of the feet at St. Mark's Church, the Syrian church. All the disciples would get up, ululating, ooh, I can't do it myself, ululating, and they would carry Jesus out of the church. They'd carry the archbishop out of the church. And the ululating, of course, is a cheer, but it is also much more commonly used with women at the time of mourning, at the time of a death. And so it isn't the cheerfulness at that point, but it represents the ululating at the time of a death. The ancient service of foot washing goes back to the Roman period for sure. And any time that a wealthy family really would have a dinner in what is called the triclinium. It's a very big banquet hall room in a home. They would first, at the beginning, the guests would come and have their feet washed. Now, the host never washes the feet. That's totally inappropriate. The feet are always washed by the slave. And so for Jesus, not washing the feet as the disciples came in, but during the meal, actually. But for that to happen, that takes on, Jesus is taking on here the role of the slave. And that is what is so important for us to be thinking about today, that Jesus taking the form of the slave instead of the host. Jesus then takes the form of the slave and goes and washes the feet of his disciples in the triclinium. Jesus the slave. And when Jesus washed the feet on Maundy Thursday, there is no question that Jesus was not taking on that role as being the slave. By doing this, Jesus was not in any way endorsing slavery, But instead, and absolutely the opposite, Jesus descended to the lowest point according to the human calculus. The slave has no freedom. The slave is nothing but a person who has immovable property. The slave is used and abused, sold and silenced, overworked and executed at will. And that night, Jesus descended to the lowest place on our social ladder. He became the slave. He entered ultimately into our deepest suffering, and he emptied himself. And I think that frequently in our services, we do not think about washing the feet as taking on that form of being a slave and emptying himself. And I think the Orthodox here help us rethink what it means to wash the feet. There's no honor in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I just love the American Religious Town Hall. I'm so happy to be a part of it too, because you get to hear different perspectives. I've been asked. I've pastored for well over 30 years, and I've probably been asked a question about foot washing in the church services, maybe less than 10 times, about the significance of it. And I'm not speaking for Baptists, because I think I've seen with some of our African American Baptists, I've seen foot washing done at communion services, and I've not seen it done in other areas. But my understanding, the way I approach the whole foot washing, John 13, from a hermeneutical perspective, you have what we call culturally conditioned statements, and then you have permanent concepts. And the culturally conditioned statement is the act of the foot washing that took place, of course, in the context biblically, as Ken and John mentioned, it was done by slaves, never by the host, by the lowest person in the home. And the application would be servant. That would be the permanent concept. And it's kind of like in Romans, when in the King James Version says to greet each other with a holy kiss. That's something we would not do, of course. Well, let me say, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that in our church, going around kissing people. So there's a permanent concept. And I think in Scripture, you have things that are prescriptive and descriptive. And for the foot washing piece, for me, I focus on the servant, the humility. Philippians 2 talks about how Christ humbled himself. He took on the form of a servant, and he even humbled himself to the point of death. And I think that is very, very crucial. I think for the takeaway for me with the foot washing is that we need to live a life of humility, servanthood, and I think when you look at the Synoptic Gospels and look at the context here, this was also in the context of the disciples asking who's going to be the greatest, who's the greatest among us. And I think Jesus was trying to get a point across to those dudes. Hey, listen, the greatest among you will be the least and the servant of all. And I think that powerful demonstration of the foot washing, Peter had a problem with it. What are you doing? What are you doing, Jesus? What are you doing? Almost like this is not something for you to do. And then, of course, we know what Jesus told him. And then Peter said, hey, bathe all of me. I want everything that you have. So I think it's a powerful piece. In our church, we do not practice it. But wow, when I see it done, I can't, say anything negative against it, because it's just something that is a pretty powerful piece. But the application for me is servanthood and humility.
Thank you. Tom?
When on our program for the Western Easter, we wished our audience Happy Easter. I want to say Happy Easter for those who may be of Eastern Orthodox traditions, and of course, in my tradition, every Sunday is Easter. Every Sunday is appropriate. It is appropriate to say the Lord is risen indeed. One of these days, folks, I want to go to Jerusalem. I love the old city of Jerusalem, but I want to go to Jerusalem with this guy right here, because of his wealth of experience and the people he knows. and the way his ministry has bridged so many gaps in our divided church internationally, and the way that that can be magnified in that particular holy city, and so John, sometime we gotta get up a trip together. What's the significance of Jesus' foot washing in terms of the ceremonial traditions of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ? I would say occasional. We are occasional foot washers. More recently than long term. I did not grow up ever having my feet washed. I still find it an odd experience. I would far rather be the washer than the washee. And in fact, in the few times that we have done foot washings, I have tried that thought out on my folks, and most of them agree that it's just something we're not used to, having somebody be, there's a certain intimacy to that. But you know, that may be, I'm thinking about pandemic time here. Foot washing may be preferred to the Lord's Supper in terms of public health this year. I think we need to talk about Jesus taking the form of a slave. I find that passage in Philippians 2 to be central to my theology. That he did not count equality with God as something to be exploited, but rather emptied himself and took upon himself the form of a servant, of a slave, even to the point of crucifixion. And of course, the first part of that sentence is, have this mind among you, people, Paul's writing. He wants us to have that mind. He wants us to be that way. And so every time I put on my robe on Sunday morning, I really think about it. Am I choosing the color of stole because I want to look cool, or because I think it's particularly fine? That robe was really intended as a piece of clerical garb to put the person wearing it in the place of the servant. And those of us who don't wear robes, and that really hasn't been a part of my particular tradition for a very long time, the suit or the dress, we can get into real finery and lots of jewelry, and you see some of the big dogs on TV flashing theirs around and talking about how great and wonderful it is that Jesus has wanted them to have that. I just can't see how they can do that and read their Bibles. Jesus doesn't call us in that direction.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. Our faith tradition, of course, we accompany each communion service with foot washing. And we do it the very literal way. The question, of course, is it meaningful in the 21st century when it's not part of our life like it was in the first century? And then the second question is, how do you do that in COVID? And we've had a couple during COVID, but I've been wondering if maybe during COVID, the proper foot washing would be to detail one another's cars. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Canon Peterson, quickly, why does the Archbishop kiss the feet of the...
Once again, the humility.
The humility.
and love. I mean, so it's both those are tied together. That it's, to kiss a person's foot.
Sure.
My land.
All right, gentlemen, let's go to a break, and we'll be right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. Thank you to our sponsor, and Pastor Lutz does want to hear from you, so please go ahead and write him and let him know what you think about this program and maybe what programs you'd like to see, what subjects you'd like to see covered by our panelists in the future. We look forward to the end of COVID and hopefully this pandemic and adding back our missing members. Let's sum up, and we'll begin with John today.
I'm going to just give a little other tidbit of information that happens on Maundy Thursday. The scripture records that Judas was actually at Jesus' left side. And in Roman hospitality, the most important guest sits at the host's left side. And the second most important guest sits at the right side. And the people sat in clusters in the room, possibly a triclinium, but certainly a large room, in clusters of 3. That's what tri means in that situation. And the question that I always struggle with is, how come Judas was the most special guest that night? Why was he chosen to be at Jesus' left-hand side? You'd think that he'd be as far away from Jesus as possible in the triclinium. But that night, Judas was at Jesus' left side as the most important guest at the Last Supper.
Tom?
Thank you. A few years ago, I got inspired or depressed or something, I don't know. I wrote something. I wrote a drama for Maundy Thursday that centers on the thoughts of the disciples as they're leaving the upper room. It has an opportunity, looking for an opportunity to use more of our men in our church because we're like many churches where the men find all sorts of reasons to let the women be in charge of things. But we wanted to use the men, and so we used them. We had them. I wrote it in such a way that each of them, as they left, either individually or in pairs from that room, spoke to the audience their thoughts, and most of it was about their incredulity at Jesus' behavior, at what he had done there in that room for them, washing their feet and breaking the bread and talking about it being his body, and sharing the cup and talking about it being his shed blood, and how they had not at that point wrapped their heads around what was going on and what all of that meant. I think as we go through this time in our lives, we need to come to terms with the servanthood of that Holy One.
Thank you, Tom. Carl?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, something, John, you said Jesus takes the role of the slave rather than host. I'd like to just change the language because I think that it's a paradox, meaning I think that he remains both. He's both Lord and servant, right? It's the king who does feet. And it shows what kingship really is. And it shows to me what leadership really is. That leadership is about service of others. It isn't about somehow centering everything on oneself. And so I know that we're not disagreeing at all, but I want it to be both and. And then secondly, as I was thinking, I remember being in one of these foot washing services, and the thing I couldn't stand was having my feet washed because it's like, not only is it uncomfortable, but it's like I should be doing the washing. I shouldn't be here sitting being washed because I'm perfectly able to do it myself. And this whole thing with Peter reminds me about how important it is for us as Christians to give other people the dignity even of serving us.
Beautiful. That's powerful. Yeah. When I studied this program, and certainly today, I'm reminding myself that I am more unlike Christ when I am selfish and self-serving. And I am more like Christ when I sacrifice and serve. And that is something that is so important for the body of Christ and for people. And we should all be slaves to Christ, where we are yoked with him and we serve him. And in John's gospel, Jesus told his disciples, as the Father has sent me, so send I you. So we should be the continuation of the incarnation and Christ's work on earth, which involves serving others and sacrificing for others.
Very good. Thank you. Really appreciate what you said, Carl. I serve on a staff, and my staff is extremely hardworking. A bunch of pastors that really, they know what they're doing, and they really are industrious beyond what one would expect. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. Now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.